We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 7th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead... India has launched major air and missile strikes on targets in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir in retaliation for a deadly attack that killed 26 civilians in Indian-controlled territory. We'll get the details. Frederick Merz is to visit Paris in his first official trip as Germany's new chancellor, by the skin of his teeth. We'll have a browse through the front pages and a roundup of transport news. Then...
the arc of Putin's rule has seen a similar increase in missiles, men and MiGs at the annual Jamboree.
Alexis Self, our foreign editor, unpacks Moscow's military pageantry. Plus, the conclave commences. Secrets, smoke and sacred suspense. Juliette Linley tells us what's at stake in the Sistine Chapel. Plus...
Hollywood doesn't do very much of that business. They have the nice sign and everything's good, but they don't do very much. A lot of it's been taken to other countries.
As Trump's tariffs hit Tinseltown, we'll ask if the Oceania film empire of Australia and New Zealand plan to strike back. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. South Asia is facing its most dangerous escalation in more than 2 decades. Overnight, Indian forces launched what it called Operation Sindoor, striking targets deep into Pakistani territory, including, according to New Delhi, the headquarters of militant groups blamed for last month's deadly attack on Hindu tourists in Indian Kashmir. Pakistan called the strikes a blatant act of war and says civilians were killed. It claims to have downed multiple Indian fighter jets in response. Shelling and gunfire have erupted across the line of control. Schools and airports are shut, and both governments are digging in. Well, joining me now is Maya Sharma, a journalist based in Bangalore. Maya, many thanks for coming on at very short notice. Can you tell us what happened overnight?
Well, from what we have heard so far, and there was in fact a briefing by 2 women defence officers just a short while ago, India actually launched strikes against Pakistan between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. last night. The Indian government says it targeted 9 sites. They say all these sites were terrorist infrastructure sites. The Indian government claims it has not hit any military targets, any civilian targets or commercial targets, and that its pinpointed attacks were against these 9 terrorist infrastructure, these terrorist camps. India from the start has, of course, been blaming Pakistan for allowing cross-border terrorism to be launched from its land. This is, of course, in connection with the Pahalgam attacks, which happened on the 22nd of April, in which 26 civilians, 25 Indians and 1 Nepali were killed, largely tourists. Most of them were tourists who were killed. And India was under severe pressure internally to respond to these attacks. The international community had, of course, been urging restraint, but India under severe pressure internally to respond to these attacks. And last night's Operation Sindoor was seen as the response to these attacks in Pahalgam.
And so how is Pakistan responding, both militarily and diplomatically?
Over the last several nights, there has been firing across the border. There have been firing at the border. Now they have actually responded, and India says that 3 civilians have been killed. Pakistan, of course, on its part is describing this as an act of war and saying that it is unprovoked. Pakistan says 5 locations were hit. Definitely, it's a clear escalation of the tension between these two countries. And Pakistan saying it reserves the right to respond to India. India, of course, saying that what it is doing is actually responding to what happened. Pakistan telling that Pakistan, in the 2 weeks since the attack, has really shown no demonstrable action for clamping down on terror, and that it is known for being a terrorist haven. So both sides really not backing down, both sides saying they're absolutely justified in what they are doing in their cross-border targeting of people. They say they're absolutely justified, both countries maintaining their positions.
So there are reports that 5 Indian fighter jets were shot down. I wonder how credible those claims are and what we know about the crash sites.
Yes, on the Pakistan side of the border, there are claims that Indian Air Force planes have in fact been shot down. There is no verification of this at all. There is speculation on media that these are perhaps old images which are being shared, but no official confirmation at all from India about the loss of any IAF planes. And there is concern also that it may be propaganda from the side of Pakistan. But Pakistan, yes, saying that more than one Indian Air Force plane has been shot down. We're still waiting for any kind of confirmation, any information on that. But so far, nothing has been reported as part of this Operation Sindoor. I might say here that Sindoor is the vermilion powder worn in the parting of married Hindu women. And it's seen as perhaps a reflection of the fact that many women saw their husbands being killed in that terrorist attack in Pahalgam. So a very emotive name given to this attack, to this Operation Sindoor. But so far, of course, no confirmation of any IAF planes being shot down from the Indian government.
So India says that these strikes were just on militant infrastructures. Is there any confirmation of that?
Well, in the press meet which just concluded, which was significantly addressed also by 2 women police officers, again, a Muslim, a Hindu, I'm sure that there was symbolism in that as well. They had details, they showed maps, they showed details of 9 camps, which they said were terrorist camps. They showed those camps, photographs of that. They gave details about each camp. They say this was part of the 3 decades of a terror web, and that the selection of these sites was based on credible input and in order to avoid the loss of civilian life. So details of each of those 9 targets was given in the press meet, which had just concluded. They say it was also the base of 3 terrorist organizations named, which they said were also responsible not just for the Pulwama attack, but also for earlier attacks on Indian soil. And the Indian government is still claiming that all these attacks were on 9 terrorist camps, and that no military, no civilian, no economic targets were actually hit.
So how does this escalation compare to previous flare-ups between the 2 countries?
Well, in 2016 and 2019, there was a certain escalation, a certain tension following attacks on Indian soil, and with India, of course, holding Pakistan responsible at least partly then as well. This is slightly different in that while India has gone across into Pakistan earlier, there were targets in the Punjab state of Pakistan which were hit. Usually the targets hit have been in what India describes as Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, what Pakistan describes as Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Usually the targets are within that area of the Kashmir region itself. But this time there were targets hit. 4 of the 9 targets were in the larger area of Pakistan, which is a little unusual. 1 target had been hit in 2019. But this is certainly an escalation that is going across into what could be described as the Pakistan mainland. 4 targets there were hit. And Pakistan also seeing this definitely as an escalation.
We've also heard threats about water supplies. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, yes, the day after the attack, that is on the 22nd April was the attack, on the 23rd itself, India did announce several measures which they said was in response to the attacks because, like I said from the start, they held Pakistan responsible. So they put the Indus Water Treaty on hold. These are rivers which are shared between India and Pakistan, and India said it would not let as much water flow towards Pakistan as was earlier the case. They put that treaty on hold. They'd also closed the border. They'd cancelled Pakistan visas, and Pakistan nationals were required to leave India. And diplomats and defense advisors were asked to leave. These were all non-military actions, diplomatic actions taken soon after the after the attack in Pahalgam. Pakistan also closed its airspace, which means that any flights west from India have had to take a different route, a longer route.
So as you said, Pakistan has called this an act of war. Do you think there's a path out of escalation at this point? Could this turn into something bigger between the neighbours who are, after all, both nuclear powered?
The concern, of course, yes, they are nuclear powers. The hope is that there will be a de-escalation. That is what the international community is calling for, whether it's the United States, the UAE, other countries which India has briefed, which includes Saudi Arabia, Russia, all of these, the United Kingdom, all of these countries have asked for a de-escalation, to ask things to calm down. India is saying that its response has been moderate, has been absolutely restrained. They're saying it has been a restrained response, which could be seen as India not wanting to escalate it further. The messages being put out on social media and other places by the Indian government is that justice has been served. I think India might be wanting to stop it here. Pakistan, of course, may feel the need to respond in kind, but the hope is that it does not escalate further, because it's a very serious situation indeed. Both countries are nuclear powers, and this long-standing disagreement should not come to a boil now. That is the hope, really.
And Maya, just quickly before you go, you're in Bangalore. Can you tell me what the atmosphere is like there? Are people genuinely concerned about what comes next?
You know, immediately after the attack, there are a number of videos that were shared, the horrifying details of the attack, of people being killed in cold blood after being asked, presumably, whether they were Hindu or Muslim. It did increase the level of anger around the country. And interestingly, today, across the country, including in Bangalore, including in other places in Karnataka and other places in India, there was, in fact, a drill announced for in case of any attack. So this drill was announced in different parts of the country for today, in case of any military response or any military attack by a country. So this defense mock drill was scheduled for today. So people are aware of this. People are constantly aware of it. The right-wing media, in particular on television channels, every night has been calling for action, has been calling for retaliation by India. So the mood has been largely built up. People's sentiments have been revved up to a certain extent. So yes, it is being thought about across the country, many hoping for peace still in the days ahead. But there has been a sentiment that India needed to take military action, and the government was under great pressure from civilian society to actually do something.
Maya, thank you very much indeed. That's Maya Sharma there, a journalist based in Bangalore. This is The Globalist. In Berlin, Friedrich Merz has finally made it to the chancellery, and is wasting no time in visiting Emmanuel Macron in Paris. The French are hoping for a reset. Relations under Olaf Scholz were frosty at best, and the Merz era may offer a new chapter, though he arrives slightly battered from an embarrassing parliamentary hiccup. So can Merz steady the ship at home and revive Europe's core alliance abroad? Well, to discuss that, I'm joined by Nina dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and the former CNN Europe editor. Good morning to you, Nina.
Good morning, Georgina.
So what are Macron and Merz hoping to achieve with this meeting, and how significant is the symbolism of Merz choosing France for his first foreign trip?
Well, he's choosing France, but he's also choosing Warsaw as well. He's determined to make it very obvious that there are these other axes of control inside the EU, but also that Germany is supposed to be back in the leadership seat. As you just pointed out in your introduction, he's arriving somewhat hobbled, and he's likely to try and make a grander figure on the international stage than he is back home, where obviously now, given the fact that he's had this embarrassing parliamentary setback, an historically embarrassing one, the first time that any German chancellor that supposedly had stitched together a coalition with enough of a majority just to rubber stamp his chancellorship and wave it through, well, he was beaten at the first attempt. There had to be a hastily reconvened vote on the same day to make sure that these visits to Paris and also Warsaw and then later on in Brussels weren't actually cancelled. What they're trying to do is to say that Europe is back on the map. Germany is back in the leadership seat, as I said, at a time when, of course, Donald Trump is very keen to engage in a trade war with Europe and also to remove US security guarantees from this part of the world.
So the personal chemistry between Schulz and Macron was infamously absent. Do we know what kind of rapport Merz has with Macron or how it might develop and why it matters so much?
Well, the Franco-German axis is the traditional economic power axis that drives Europe, and lots of EU diplomats, particularly from some of the southern European states I've been speaking to over the last couple of months, have become increasingly frustrated with the absence of German leadership, particularly under Olaf Scholz's three-way traffic light coalition that appeared to have to abstain on really important EU decisions that normally Germany under Angela Merkel's time would have been in the driving seat for. And that ill-prepared Europe to deal with, on the one hand, the war in Ukraine, and also, secondly, the trade war that's coming from America. So Friedrich Merz is very keen to say, well, look, I'm a former lawyer, corporate business person. I can look somebody like Donald Trump in the eye and stand up to him as representing a bloc of 450 million potential consumers that has its own huge power base. But obviously, there will continue to be lots of voices from back home in Germany that say, well, look, you promised the stability that Olaf Scholz's government couldn't deliver, but now it appears as though your hand wasn't as strong as you originally claimed. So I suppose he's going to have this mismatch internationally and domestically.
Well, as you say, Germany likes to be seen as the rock of European stability, and I wonder if the Bundestag drama, which was not the smooth handover he'd hoped for, damages his ability to lead in Brussels or to be taken seriously by other heads of government.
Well, it depends who exactly voted against him. So if we circle back and look at what exactly happened dramatically early in the morning as he was sitting there in Parliament waiting for this sort of rubber stamping of his chancellorship after having rushed through coalition negotiations. This is one of the things that's irked people on his own party's side. He stitched together a government very ruthlessly, quite quickly in 2 months. Normally in Germany it could take up to several months. So that was deemed by some on his own Christian Democratic Union party to have been too swift a deal where he gave up too much ground, giving 7 cabinet positions to the centre-left Social Democrats, despite the fact that they came in third position in February's elections, having had one of their worst showings in about a century. So it might be that there were some CDU members of his own party that were responsible for this particular rebellion, not so much the centre-left that are part of the other side of the coalition. And I'm sure that obviously the whips inside his party will be trying to figure out who those dissenters are. He lost the first vote by 6 votes. He managed to get through on the second one, but only by 9, which by my calculations is still a couple short of his majority with the two parties inside Parliament. And so what that shows is that all of these grand plans that he has, so this big debt-fueled spending splurge to revive the German economy, his plans to try and shore up support for Ukraine, to protect Germany's borders, particularly against asylum seekers, it's going to be very hard to enact all of that if your hand has been showed to be quite so weak back home.
Angela Merkel was in the room for the vote. She is, of course, the former chancellor. It was meant to be a statesman-like passing of the baton. What does her presence and her silence say about the moment?
Well, she and Friedrich Merz famously have an extremely testy relationship. I think it would be fair to say that she does not like him. There's huge amounts of personal animosity. He feels that she stymied his attempt to become chancellor and to wrest control of the party at various attempts in 2018, then 2021. And so, boy, must that have been an interesting moment to watch her. I saw it on the television screens, watch her looking on as her party that used to look up to her over her 4 terms in office, 3 of which were with one of these grand coalitions with the centre-left Social Democrats. They used to look up to her as famously Mutti, didn't they? Mother Merkel. And there she was benignly looking on at her political nemesis from her own side as he got a real drubbing and was left with a political bloody nose.
And Nina, is this then just a shaky start or a warning sign for Merz's whole chancellorship? How much political capital has he already spent and can he recover quickly?
I think this may not be fatal, but in the future it could end up shortening the life of this very unstable government, which doesn't have a huge majority. I think it's only 12 inside the parliament, so they can't afford to have too many enemies from their own side. And I think what it'll continue to do will continue to embolden the far-right AfD party, that after the elections at the end of February that saw Friedrich Merz's party get more votes than others, but still in second position was the far-right AfD party, which in the last week has been deemed an extremist organisation by Germany's own security apparatus. Previously, we had state party branches of the AfD that were deemed to have espoused extremist views, particularly against migrants of Muslim origin. Now the whole party has been deemed extremist, irrespective of the fact that 1 in 5 Germans chose to vote for them. That presents a real democratic conundrum for somebody like Friedrich Merz, because snapping on his heels is a party that technically the German state can spy on, can investigate. Mainstream parties can crowd out. There's already a so-called firewall around the far right, but he, in the past, used them to try and get through a resolution on immigration. And that's one of the reasons that he's been bruised by his own side, because people feel they don't trust him when he says he wouldn't get into bed with the far right now that they're neck and neck in the polls.
Nina, thank you very much indeed. That was Nina dos Santos. Now, still to come on the programme. We'll explore Switzerland's celestial ambitions. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's 7:21 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, coming to you live from Midori House, and joining me in the studio for The Globalist is Zoe Grunewald, who is Westminster editor at The Lead. Zoe, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's start with this very widely reported developments in Sudan. What is The Guardian saying about this?
So Sudan's Security and Defence Council has broken diplomatic relations with the United Arab Emirates, and this is, of course, after years of alleging backing of the paramilitary Sudanese Rapid Support Forces by the UAE. So Sudan has said it's going to sever its diplomatic relations with the state and recalled its ambassador, claiming that it's breached Sudan's sovereignty through its RSF proxy, which has been fighting in, of course, this bloody civil war that has been in the region since April 2023.
And, of course, this comes after the attack on Port Sudan, an area that was previously deemed safe.
Absolutely, yes. So flights have been suspended, of course, which is now to Port Sudan, which is now worrying for the state, because obviously there's concerns about getting aid in. But there has been a plethora of evidence about the UAE's potential involvement in the region for a while. So passports recovered from battlefields in Sudan back in July last year seem to suggest that the state was covertly putting boots on the ground. Sudan, the UAE was able to fend off an attempt to persuade the International Court of Justice in The Hague to examine Sudan's claims that the UAE was complicit in a genocide in Darfur. There's been lots of tension between these two states for a while, but now it looks as if this is really coming to a head, obviously with the Sudan severing its diplomatic relations between itself and UAE.
Let's turn our gaze to the Middle East now, and Gaza will be entirely destroyed, the Israeli minister says. This is the headline coming at us from multiple publications.
That's right. So the finance minister in Israel has declared that Gaza will be destroyed. And that the Palestinian population will leave in great numbers. And of course, this has renewed fears about ethnic cleansing in the region. Netanyahu said the population would be moved for its own protection in a video that he posted on social media, but there's been no further details. And of course, this is going to create great concern, not only across the immediate region in Egypt and Jordan, who are expecting to see an exodus of refugees, but across the rest of the world, who are very concerned about allegations of genocide in Israel. Obviously, we know there is a warrant out by the International Criminal Court for Netanyahu's arrest and the arrest of his defence minister. And there's, supposedly the ICC is reported to be preparing more arrest warrants. So as much as it did feel like we were reaching, potentially a ceasefire not that long ago, it seems that the situation has really deteriorated again. And there's lots of concerns about the state of Palestine and the people within it.
And of course, this whole question of them going, of people in Gaza going to a third country, that third country might be Egypt, it might be Jordan. Both of them have said that they will refuse to allow an exodus of refugees onto their territory. They say that would make them a party to the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So where do they go?
Exactly. This is the concern. If there aren't countries that are willing to take Gazans because they're worried that this would be in some ways allowing Israel to undertake its operations there is a real concern that people of Gaza will not be able to flee. They won't be able to get out. There were already lots of concerns about people, aid not being able to get in, food and water. And
for 2 months, they have not had any food or water.
And more than 52,000 people have been killed in the Israeli offensive in Gaza since the October 2023 attack on Israel. So lots of concern that this is, the young, vulnerable population in Gaza is going to be subject to this. And the rest of the world is looking on, wondering what to do, whether it's possible to de-escalate. Obviously, we know Netanyahu is enthralled to his right-wing cabinet, so it doesn't look like this is going to simmer down anytime soon, and lots of concerns about the Palestinian population.
And just talking about the food and water and the fact that they have been under this blockade, Israel now says that it wants to control any aid that comes through. And of course, the UN and everybody who's responsible for delivering that aid is really, really fighting back on that.
Absolutely. And we also know that aid workers have been subject to attacks in Gaza as well. So it's incredibly dangerous. And there's a real concern that if Israel were able to do that, that would contravene fundamental humanitarian principles, not only over Palestinian sovereignty, but also, whether Israel, if it wants to remove the population of Gaza, could be indeed trusted to get food and water in. So incredibly concerning situation there.
The positive news coming out of India has rather been overtaken by events, but let's just look at this trade deal that it struck with the UK after 3 years of talks.
Yeah, so this is the most significant, they're calling it the most significant trade deal since Brexit. It took 3 years to reach, and the UK and India have agreed this deal, which should make it easier for UK firms to export whiskey, cars and other products to India, and also cut taxes on products coming from India, such as clothing and footwear exports. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has got quite a positive reception by the papers this morning for it. There is one argument, though, which is particularly over, although the British government are saying this will be no change in immigration policy, and obviously immigration is a real hot topic here in the UK, there is concern because Indian workers coming over to work here will be exempt from national insurance payments. Now, lots of commentators have pointed out that this is already the case in many trade deals, and this is to stop double taxation on these short-term visas. But this is likely to be a political sticking point because there's been lots of rows over national insurance hikes over the past few months, and also lots of concerns about anything that looks like increasing immigration to the UK at a time where immigration is really shaping public mood and voting.
And finally, let's have a look at two celebrity actors who one may or may not have heard of, and how their row is actually affecting the whole right-wing narrative in the US.
Yeah, so people will probably remember the court case between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And there is a similar kind of story emerging about an actress called Blake Lively and an actor called Justin Baldoni. They starred together in a film called It Ends With Us, but then Blake Lively sued Justin Baldoni over claims of sexual harassment, and Justin Baldoni countersued. And what has proceeded is, or what has happened afterwards, I should say, is a social media war where there has been lots and lots of negative briefing particularly about Blake Lively, which has been steeped in misogyny and sexism and has been jumped upon by the American right. So figures like Candace Owens and other right-wing, alt-right American figures. And what is really happening here, and what's very interesting, is this seems to be a bit of a rabbit hole because it's happening on TikTok, happening on social media. People are getting sucked into this, which seems like sort of innocuous celebrity gossip, but actually being consumed consumed by misogynistic tropes and pushed down kind of alt-right, far-right rabbit holes about women and eventually going into much kind of more extreme content. So this article is kind of pulling apart the social media machine behind these kind of smear campaigns against women in Hollywood and showing how they can be co-opted by the far right.
I mean, I think Candace Owens is very interested, her role in this. She is obviously very much in the public eye as a journalist, but we also know that she has in the past downplayed the Holocaust. She's alleged that Brigitte Macron, the wife of the French president, is a man. She's called Volodymyr Zelensky a welfare queen. But now many people are saying she's actually uniting conservatives and liberals with her coverage of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is going to be of quite a lot of concern because it does feel like it is a rabbit hole to more extreme content. But I think this is really, it's really sinister because it does seem like innocuous celebrity gossip. You know, people go on their social media. You can't automatically see what you're watching is in any way necessarily being published by a far-right influencer or an alt-right influencer. But very, very quickly, the algorithm will start producing similar content. So there's a lot of concern that this kind of stuff, which is often, who knows the truth of the matter, but it is a lot of the content is rooted in sexist tropes, becomes that kind of gateway to more extreme content. And it just looks like, basically Hollywood gossip on the face of it, but something much more sinister can come out of it.
Zoe, thank you very much indeed. That's Zoe Grunewald there. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. More explosions and anti-aircraft fire were reported in Port Sudan overnight following drone attacks that ignited fuel depots and damaged the country's main humanitarian aid hub. The Red Sea city had remained largely untouched by Sudan's civil war until this week's escalation. Israel struck Yemen's main airport in Sana'a on Tuesday, killing 3 people and disabling the site in response to a Houthi missile launched near Israel's Ben Gurion airport. It was the second Israeli airstrike on Yemen in 2 days, marking a sharp escalation in regional tensions tied to the war in Gaza. And Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney told Donald Trump that Canada will never be for sale during a blunt but cordial first meeting at the White House, urging an end to talk of annexation and US tariffs. Despite past tensions, both leaders called the talks constructive and agreed to begin negotiating a new bilateral economic relationship. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now it's time for a closer look at one of the other stories we're following today. Here, Monocle's foreign editor, Alexis Self, looks at what Russia's Victory Day celebrations really represent.
Military parades are never about the past. They're about the present. Before Leonid Brezhnev made the 9th of May a public holiday in 1965, commemorating the end of the Second World War was a muted affair in Russia. A society that had given over 25 million lives to the fight was in no mood for flypasts and ticker tape. But as the Cold War heated up, Victory Day became more and more about militaristic posturing aimed at a Western audience. The arc of Putin's rule has seen a similar increase in missiles, men and MiGs at the annual Jamboree. This year's event, coinciding with the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany, promises to be the most baroque of his 2.5 decades in power, featuring costumed reenactments of the fall of Berlin and a scale replica of the Reichstag that will be stormed and beflagged. As in the 1970s and 80s, the true purpose of this Friday's parade is not to act as a solemn commemoration for the millions dead, but instead to draw a heavy-handed parallel between a past conflict and a present one. Putin has consistently framed his full-scale invasion of Ukraine as a repeat of the glorious vanquish of Hitler's Germany by labelling Ukraine's pro-Western leadership Nazis and drawing parallels between the invasion of the Soviet Union and the expansion of NATO. It does not take a student of history to see the tragic absurdity of past atrocities being invoked to justify modern ones. Most world leaders, or at least the democratically elected ones, recognise Putin's parades for what they are: acts of intimidation against enemies both internal and external. This year's grand event comes as the US government is attempting to strong-arm Kyiv into a peace deal with Moscow. Whether or not one believes that Ukraine should accept such a deal, however unfavourable, if Putin is able to frame next year's Victory Day as a double celebration, the only thing it bodes well for is more military parades.
That was Monocle's foreign editor Alexis Self, and for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter at monocle.com/minute. It is the start of an historic day in Rome. Cardinals are gathering at the Vatican this morning ahead of their solemn procession into the Sistine Chapel, where the conclave will officially begin. Phones are off, signals jammed, and soon the doors will close on one of the world's most secretive and consequential votes. Joining me now is Monocle's regular contributor, Juliet Linley. She's a journalist, a broadcaster, and a former Vatican correspondent. Juliet's here to unpack the ritual, the runners, and what kind of pope might emerge. Juliet, welcome back. Just set the scene for us. What's happening inside the Vatican right now, and when does the conclave formally get underway?
Good morning, Georgina. Yes, we're coming into the final hours at the Vatican before the successor to Francis is elected. So the conclave will officially begin at 4:30 Central European time inside the Sistine Chapel. Right now, it's 8:30 in the morning inside the world's smallest country, population 800, with an area of half a kilometre. But despite its size, it's got a large spotlight shining on it today. And as we speak now, 8:30 in the morning, 133 cardinals, they're known as the princes of the church, they'll be donning their scarlet robes and they're getting ready for a special mass that's typically celebrated inside St. Peter's on the morning of the first day of a conclave. So the Mass will be celebrated by the Dean of the College of Cardinals. He's the same cardinal who celebrated, you'll remember, Francis's funeral back on April 26th. He's called Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. But as you might remember, he's over 90 and he won't be eligible to vote in the conclave this afternoon. So that Mass that takes place this morning is actually open to the public, and it's the last public moment before the cardinals are closed off inside the Sistine Chapel. After lunch, they will assemble in the Pauline Chapel inside the Apostolic Palace. Then they'll walk in a procession into the Sistine Chapel, chanting, by the way, the Litany of Saints. And then it'll be declared extra omnes, and everyone who's not directly involved in the conclave gets out of the Sistine Chapel. The doors are shut and voting begins. So at 4:30, voting begins. You can expect a first puff of smoke at 5 o'clock. If it's white, you've already got a pope. Not likely. So then another round of voting will take place, and at 7 there'll be a next puff of smoke. Who knows? It's never happened that within the first day of a conclave they do choose a pope. But then you'll have, following in the morning, 2 puffs at 10:30 and 12, and again at 5 and at 7 in the afternoons. And people are guessing that it'll take maybe 2 or 3 days, Georgina. Perhaps by Friday we'll know who's the successor to Peter.
Could we just address the fact that suggestions have been made that the smoke could in fact be orange? How has the Vatican reacted to the White House official account posting a meme of Donald Trump dressed as the Pope?
That was a pretty stunning moment. And as I was saying to our editor-in-chief, Tyler Brulé, on air, imagine Mark Carney posting on AI, by using an AI rendition of himself on social media, a picture of himself as the Dalai Lama. This was quite surreal. And at last Saturday's press conference at the Vatican, a lot of the Italian and Spanish media were up in arms. They were visibly upset, and they were asking Matteo Bruni, the spokesman, about that, but he refrained to comment. So there has been no direct comment from the Vatican specifically about Trump thinking that he would make a really great pope.
Juliet, we're running out of time, but I just quickly want to ask you, betting markets have made Zuppi, Tegel and Turkson the clear front runners. How much stock should we put on those odds? And is this about a battle of visions, not just continents? Is it about major divides? And what are those themes shaping the vote and upping the odds on those various cardinals?
Okay, so the odds, first of all, Georgina, let's just say that you're not really supposed to gamble recklessly in the eyes of the church. So I really hope that you haven't been putting too much money on one of those candidates.
My money's on Donald Trump.
But we've got so many of these names coming up regularly, a lot of Italian names, Zuppi and Parolin. I mean, especially Parolin, who was the number 2 at the Vatican under Francis, and he's sort of a secure choice. You've got Zuppi, who's been involved in the Ukraine-Russian prisoner exchanges. Some outsiders, maybe even Ghanaian Cardinal Peter Turkson. A lot of people are putting their bets on Philippine Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. Your guess is as good as mine. Remember that in 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who then became Pope Francis, the odds were 50-1. Just 2 days before he was elected. And right now, if you want to look at odds, you've got José Tolentino from Madeira, who's 50-1 odds. So who knows if it'll be a Portuguese pope. But as you said, it's not so much about geography. In fact, the vote is not going to likely be split along geographical lines. It is going to be split along themes. Because if you think about it, Europe has a majority of cardinals, has 53 out of the 133 cardinal electors. But that doesn't mean that the next pope is going to be a European. It's going to be more about whether the cardinals want to go with themes like ecclesiastical matters, doctrine, moral teaching, conservative positions, maintaining rituals, let's say like the Latin Mass, swinging the pendulum, if you want, a bit to the other side of where Francis was going, or if they want a Francis 2.0, or in any case, someone with a progressive vision, keen to bring the church closer to the people, keen to play an international role, if you want, even in peacemaking, keen to reform this centuries-old church. But Georgina, you know what the bottom line is, as so many people keep saying? Francis was great at filling the piazzas, but he wasn't necessarily filling the pews. And this is what's happening. Not enough people are going to church, and not enough young men are choosing to become priests. So that the next pope, will need to fill the seminaries.
Juliet, thank you very much indeed. I'm quite sure we'll be hearing a lot more from you over the next few days. That's Juliet Linley there from our Zurich studio. You're with Monocle Radio. Well, it's 8:41 in Zurich, it's 7:41 here in London, and Switzerland is reaching for the stars. The Swiss Army has begun testing its first satellite, launched by the Geneva-based company WiseKey. The small satellite is part of a wider push to digitise the battlefield and reduce dependence on foreign tech, all while riding aboard a SpaceX rocket. So what does this move tell us about Switzerland's evolving role in space, and could it be a model for other small nations? Bruno Kaufmann is Global Democracy Correspondent at the Swiss Broadcasting Company and joins us now. Bruno, what can you tell us about the satellite and the company WiseKey?
Yes, hello, good morning, Georgina. Yes, this is really a new development in the Swiss, let's say, space policy to use this kind of private satellite producer in Geneva for security measures for the Swiss Army. This is the first time this happens, but it's of course not the first time Switzerland is really doing things in the sky. Switzerland has been all around since the first Apollo missions to the moon and has been one of the founding members of ESA, the European Space Agency. So this is a continuation of a long-term strategy.
So the satellite was launched aboard a SpaceX rocket. If Switzerland is trying to reduce foreign dependency, does relying on Elon Musk's infrastructure create a bit of a contradiction?
It is, but at the same time, this has to do with the costs, of course. I mean, this first military use of a satellite, this is really the pilot, because the idea is to develop a really network of Swiss military satellites. And for this, Switzerland now tries out different solutions. It hasn't put so much money yet into this program, but there is a broader idea, a broader strategy of the Swiss space strategy to develop a really comprehensive national mobile security system, which will be based on satellites. And for this, Switzerland is planning to invest at least 3 billion Swiss francs.
And what does this signal about the military's priorities, and how does it fit into broader national security planning?
I mean, Switzerland is not a member of NATO. Switzerland has its own security forces, and it's really seeing space as a way of doing more efficient, let's say, intelligence collection, how to support the command and also to navigate. The idea is to have something like the Internet of Things based on these satellites, which enables Swiss commanders to see every piece of this security infrastructure in real time and online. And it also involves the development of its own mobile security system called the Guardian, which will be an Android-based mobile phone linked to this satellite network. So Switzerland want to use this smart technology, this forward-looking technology, to be able to defend itself.
And what might this mean for Switzerland's place in the international space and defence landscape, especially amongst other smaller neutral countries?
Yes, Switzerland is certainly one of the most, let's say, advanced small states when it comes to space technology. As I already said, Switzerland has been all along the development of modern Western space technology from the 1960s. In fact, Switzerland was also present with technology on the first Apollo missions to the moon. And it has also had its own astronaut working with the space shuttle program in the 1990s, and it has, in a way, had a political ambition to be involved also for its own economy. Because I mean, Swiss atomic clocks, data transfer technologies, this is all about, let's say, a very, very advanced technology. And it helps, of course, Switzerland to be a powerhouse of these kinds of technology. And now it wants to use it not only for making money abroad, but also to secure its own borders.
Bruno, thank you very much indeed. That's Bruno Kaufmann, who's global democracy correspondent at the Swiss Broadcasting Company. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, let's have a quick roundup of aviation news with Gabriel Lee, who's Monocle's transport correspondent. He joins us from Stockholm. Gabriel, good morning to you. We're going to begin by looking at European regulators who've made a comment about China's COMAC jet, saying it won't be certified in Europe for some time to come.
That's right, yeah. And COMAC, of course, would love to be able to sell its aircraft to European airlines. But before sort of figuring out the answer to the question of whether there's a market for that, whether they would buy, they, of course, need to be certified in Europe. And so that's something they're no doubt making a big push for. And they would have liked to have that happen sooner rather than later. The latest comments from the European Union Aviation Safety Agency director were basically indicating that this won't happen for some time, possibly 3 up to 6 years from now. They may have to wait. So no doubt a frustrating moment for China, but to be expected as well.
Now, Qatar Airways has thrown a much-needed lifeline to Boeing. What's behind that story?
Right. So, well, we're not sure of the details yet, but all reports seem to indicate that Qatar Airways is lining up to buy roughly 100, possibly up to 200 wide-body jets from Boeing, which will be a really important order for Boeing at the moment. Of course, this comes ahead of the U.S. president's trip to the Middle East next week, which is sort of designed to sort of build business, and especially in light of tariffs that have been really wreaking havoc with Boeing's ability to sell aircraft. In fact, we've seen that China, for example, has stopped taking delivery of Boeing aircraft because of these tariffs, and other airlines are having to do kind of creative workarounds to not have to get hit, because you imagine the cost of an aircraft, certain high percentage tariff on that would make it just not feasible to buy. So Boeing having a lot of trouble on top of its earlier troubles, its many woes, as we've covered here several times. This will be a big deal if they can land such a big order for the big jets from Qatar Airways.
Air New Zealand now, because they've just finished refitting the first aircraft to have its much-awaited new business class. Tell us about that.
Right. So this new business class has been very much looked forward to and awaited, partly because Air New Zealand has a good reputation in general, but their business class has been quite outdated for some time. It's really a 20-year-old product. And they've been also kind of teasing and talking about this new business class for some years now already. So it's a great relief to anyone who ever flies Air New Zealand that this has now been installed on the first aircraft. And from here, we should see it installed pretty quickly, progressively on all its 787 Dreamliners. So they've announced that it's going to be flying. You can buy a ticket on it starting from May the 19th. They're going to fly it to Brisbane, and then after that back to Auckland and over to San Francisco. It'll probably enter the more, the bigger long-haul routes like San Francisco after that. So good news for Air New Zealand and all of its customers.
No, except for me, I fly Air New Zealand on May the 10th, just missing that revamped business class. Finally, let's talk about the state of Newark Airport air traffic control. There have been a lot of problems there, and now there's been a really ominous warning from someone who works there.
Right, yeah, this kind of has been hitting the news a lot lately, partly because this one controller went on MSNBC to say that, basically it's not safe. Don't fly into Newark because it's unsafe at the moment. And this is all down to a series of factors. Primarily at the moment, it's a staffing problem. They don't have enough people. Controllers are overworked. And that airspace is, of course, very congested, very complicated. We'll also see that there have been reports about basically antiquated, outdated equipment. And we had last week a meltdown of communication. So there was a period where controllers could not speak to aircraft around the Newark area. And you imagine how much of a problem that could be very quickly. It only lasted a minute or two, but it was a sign of big problems there. And it's got everybody talking. Of course, there have also been many incidents over the past year or two, near misses, especially in the U.S., with showing signs of air traffic control system under strain. So it's sort of the latest sort of very high-profile thing to come out. I would hope to see that they really take this seriously. But so far, we haven't seen the sort of holistic movement to sort of fix that system in the U.S.
And Gabriel, can this be put down to the huge cuts that Doge and Elon Musk's actions in cutting government employees?
I think those are not helping, certainly, but I think these problems date far before all of this and the new administration. I think that there's been a lack of investment in the system for many years, and they're paying the price now.
Gabriel, thank you very much indeed. That's Gabriel Lee there. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Well, let's head to Australia now, where the film industry is feeling a bit rattled after Donald Trump, back on the campaign trail, announced plans for 100% tariffs on movies made outside the US. Well, the idea is to keep American productions on American soil. But for countries like Australia and New Zealand, which have become go-to locations for Hollywood blockbusters, the ripple effects could be serious. With us now is Nadine Whitney, who's co-chair of the Australian Film Critics Association. Nadine, we really want to understand what this means for Hollywood Down Under. I mean, Australia's film sector has boomed, in part thanks to generous location incentives. So how much do international productions, especially American ones, actually matter to your local industry?
Well, actually quite a lot. If we look at the injection of capital into the Australian screen industry, we have 768 million during the 2023 and 2024 financial year. That was reported by Screen Australia, and that was just under the billion of the year before that, and before that, because of the writers' strikes and of course with COVID and those kinds of things which nobody could control. Australia has invested quite a lot in not only offering location offsets, but also offering production offsets. So they're federal, but also each state offers their own offsets as well. So and each state, like Screen Vic, we have in Melbourne, a new studio. The Gold Coast and Queensland have been a go-to for a long time with the studios there. There's a new studio in Byron Bay, which is a kind of coastal northern New South Wales. So we are putting a lot of work out there for American film producers and directors to come and film here because of Australia's not only cheaper production offsets and cuts, but also because of the physicality of Australia. It can stand in for a lot of places.
So the arts minister said that Australia will stand up for its screen sector. In practical terms, what can Canberra actually do to shield the industry?
Well, in practical terms, what can Trump actually do? At this point, we're all running a bit in the dark, because what does a tariff mean exactly? And are we talking about only American films, or are we talking about all foreign films coming into America? Because he hasn't actually made that clear, essentially, what the tariff will mean. And I think people are concerned, but I don't think at this stage they're panicked, because the question of how that will be implemented is so complex that, how do we stand up to something when we don't even know how it will happen or how it could happen? So I think that Tony Burke, he's keeping an eye on things, as is his compatriot in New Zealand is as well. Because New Zealand has the Weta Workshop, which has been doing, post-production for so many films. Disney films, Marvel films. The most recent Thunderbolts film, for example, is Film New South Wales, did a lot of the post-production. So, these are big studios that Trump is coming up against, who might actually rub back at him and say, we don't actually want to spend that money. We filmed great things like Pirates of the Caribbean in Australia, and there was no problem. And with the most recent bushfires, not bushfires, that's so Australian to say bushfires, the most recent fires in Los Angeles, and other aspects, Hollywood itself needs a massive cash injection to even be able to do what Trump wants to do, to keep movies in America again. But California can't be the rest of the world. You can't make Martin Scorsese's Silence in California. So it would essentially cut off what filmmakers could make in terms of American stories. And it's a very confusing proposal.
And just briefly, if the tariffs do go ahead, could this force Australia to pivot? And might we see more homegrown storytelling for global audiences, or even deeper ties with non-US markets?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that is happening is that it would definitely force the hand of the Australian government to fully embrace Australian streaming quotas and film quotas in itself to keep the industry going. Quite a well-known director and producer here, Robert Connolly, who made The Dry, for example, has said that, it is time now to turn our industry back on concentrating on itself. But it's a twin proposition, because with American productions coming here, they give Australians more money to make films themselves, if that makes sense, by utilising Australian crews and services. So it would be great, but I think that what we would see is a return more to streaming fare. And also I think that's what we would see too in Hollywood if these tariffs came through. I think Australia already has ties to the Indian market, for example, and we're making ties to Vietnamese market. So we'd go, I think, through Asia a lot.
Nadine, thank you very much indeed. That's Nadine Whitney there. And sadly, that's all we have time for today. Thanks to our producers Hassan Anderson, Carlotta Rebello and Monica Lillis, our researcher Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.